Hi, I'm Dawn, and welcome to Designs by Gaddis, the ultimate destination for home decor enthusiasts who want to create beautiful spaces without breaking the bank. I'm here to inspire you to unleash your creativity and transform your home into a haven that you love to live in. I used an old black frame that I found in my stash. I painted it with white chalk paint first to cover up the dark color. I then painted it again with folk art aqua acrylic paint. I had a piece of chicken wire in my stash. Using a staple gun, I attached the chicken wire to the back of the frame. The staples didn't want to go in all the way, so I used a hammer. I used a pair of wire cutters to trim off the excess chicken wire. I continued pulling and stapling until I had all the chicken wire attached to the frame. I went around the chicken wire and checked for any sharp edges and used a hammer to bang them into the frame so no one would get stuck by them. And of course, when I say no one, I mean me. I turned the frame over and began distressing the front with both white chalk paint and antiquing wax. I then used a baby wipe to lighten the distressing. I think the frame turned out perfect, and now I'll show you how I made the egg wreath for it. I painted these Dollar Tree mini eggs from my stash with folk art terracotta paint in the color sea stone. I love this color. It is so pretty. It's a light blue, and I absolutely love the texture of the terracotta paint. Sorry guys, it's storming here. Once the eggs were dry, I began placing them onto a piece of jewelry wire from my stash. I pushed the wire through the center of each egg. When I had all the eggs on the wire, I used a pair of wire cutters and cut the wire. I then placed the ends of the wire into the eggs on either side. I flicked some brown paint onto the eggs. And stapled some ribbon to the frame with the wreath. And just look at how adorable. I think it turned out so stinking cute. I used this wooden cross I found in my stash and removed the twine from the top. Then applied some of this gel stain using a baby wipe. The idea for this garland came from Blessed Bayou on Etsy. I'll leave a link to the Etsy store in the description. I placed a piece of tape on the end of some white cotton string and began stringing the beads. I have had these beads in my stash and they were perfect for this Easter garland. I have been trying to mostly use items from my stash for the past few months, and it has been fun finding things I forgot I had. Just curious, do you have a large craft stash and forget what you have like I do? I placed the string through the hole in the cross and tied a simple knot to hold it. Then cut the string off of the ball and tied another knot to hold the beads on. I had to make a big enough knot so the beads wouldn't slip over it. I love how it turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Cut the twine off of 3 wooden crosses and hot glued them together. I wanted a thicker cross and was using only items from my stash. I've been trying to use mostly items from my stash since the first of the year and have told myself no more until most of this is gone. I have a craft room and a 12 by 12 storage building full of nothing but craft supplies. I have so much, it's like going shopping at home. The hole at the top needed to be larger, so I used my drill and the largest drill bit I had. I sanded the cross to smooth it out. Next, I painted the cross with chalk paint, making sure I got the sides also. I didn't like the way the sides looked, so I used some Dollar Tree spackling and filled the little cracks in. Once the spackling was dry, I used a piece of sandpaper wrapped around a dowel to smooth the sides out. This helped me get into the corners of the cross. I then used a finger sander around the front and back to smooth away any of the spackling. And then applied another layer of paint. I used these square beads from my stash and a piece of white cotton string. And I actually found this beading needle, which I'd forgotten about, in my stash. I used it to string the beads and the cross onto the string. This made stringing everything together so much easier. Once the garland was the length I wanted, I attached the cross with a simple knot. And created and attached a tassel at the other end. And just look at how sweet this farmhouse garland turned out. I used another cross from my stash and removed the twine from the top. I then filled the hole at the top with spackling and let it dry. I used 220 grit sandpaper and smoothed out the spackling on the cross. This DIY was inspired by the little shop over on Etsy, Little August Ranch. I'll leave a link in the description to the shop. And used a baby wipe to remove the dust. I painted the cross with folk art chalk paint and wiped it with a baby wipe before it had time to dry. I used my Cricut and cut out a stencil with the word forgiven and applied it to the cross. I wanted the design to be as crisp as possible. I applied a layer of Mod Podge over the stencil and let it dry. The Mod Podge helps the bleed through when stenciling, meaning the paint won't seep under the stencil. Once the Mod Podge was dry, I used a Dollar Tree makeup sponge and a clothespin to stencil the design onto the cross. I used a pouncing motion to cover the stencil. When stenciling, you don't want to rub the paint across the stencil. This will cause it to bleed. Pouncing is the best way I have found to avoid this. Before the paint dried, I removed the stencil and used a weeding tool to remove the remainder of the vinyl. Once it was dry, I used the same paint I used on the stencil and dry brushed it onto the cross for a weathered, rustic look. I hot glued one of these small squares to the back of the cross so it would stand up. And just look at how stinking cute it turned out. I found this little wood frame in my stash. I had already stained the outside of the frame with antiquing wax for another project, but apparently never used it. Why? I don't know. I taped off the inside edges with painter's tape. And painted the inside with folk art sheepskin chalk paint. This DIY was inspired by Timber House Shop over on Etsy. I'll leave a link to the store in the description. I used my Cricut and cut out the stencil and applied it to the sign. I applied a layer of Mod Podge over the stencil to help with bleed through when I stenciled it. I used a Dollar Tree makeup sponge and a clothespin to apply the paint to the stencil, using a pouncing motion. Once the paint had dried a little, but wasn't completely dry, I removed the stencil. I had a few spots that I had gotten the dark paint on, so I simply used a small paintbrush and touched them up. I love how this little tiara tray sign turned out. Perfect for an Easter tiara tray, or to simply sit on a table or shelf. Let me know what you think in the comments. I found this cute little wood bunny in my stash. And as y'all know, bright colors aren't really my thing. So I wanted to tone him down just a bit. And like usual, I wasn't really sure exactly what I was going with when I started. Am I the only one who starts a project with sort of an idea and it totally changes during the DIY process? I find myself doing it more often than not. I have an idea, but by the end, it's totally something else. I removed the tail from the bunny and set it to the side. I then scuff sanded the bunny a little and wiped him down with a baby wipe to remove all the dust. I first painted the bunny gray, but didn't really like it. Let's try black. Nope, don't like it either. I'm telling you, sometimes I'm amazed at how often I change my mind. I wonder if maybe I have adult ADD. I get distracted so easily and can't seem to decide on anything. Okay, so after several other attempts, I decided to use some of the folk art terracotta paint. Let's keep our fingers crossed that I like this one. Apparently, I didn't like this light color and chose another one. I swear the bunny will eventually be painted. So I changed the terracotta paint to a darker pink color and used several different pinks to create a look I finally liked. Okay, I promise to never make you watch my indecisiveness ever again. I really didn't realize I changed the color so many times trying to find something I liked until now. But I think the little bunny turned out perfect. I mean, just look at how stinking cute he is. I painted this piece of scrap wood with plaster chalk paint. I sized and cut free cut file from Craft House. I used transfer paper and aligned the bunnies on it. And then placed them onto the wood. I then used 3 Dollar Tree pom-poms and glued them to the bunnies' butts. The pom-poms seemed a little big to me, so I trimmed them down. I love how the pom-poms add some dimension to the sign. These bunnies are so adorable. I used a Dollar Tree succulent pot and placed a piece of floral foam in the bottom. I cut a piece of Dollar Tree white felt down and used a very small styrofoam ball. I wrapped the felt around the styrofoam ball to create the bunny's butt and used a rubber band to secure the felt to the ball. For the bunny's tail, I used a white Dollar Tree pom-pom and glued it onto the felt. I folded a piece of felt in half and cut out some bunny ears. I actually cut out 4 ears and glued 2 of them together to make the ear a little stronger, and glued them onto the styrofoam ball. I trimmed down some of the felt at the end of the ball and then glued it into the pot. He needed some feet, so I used another piece of felt and cut feet out and used a marker to draw the pads of the feet. I then glued the bunny feet onto the bunny. For the carrots, I used some floral wire and wood beads. I cut the wire down to size and used 3 6mm beads and 2 4mm beads to create each carrot. I left a portion of the wire sticking out at the bottom of the carrot so I could push it into the floral foam. I added a dab of hot glue to keep the beads in place. I then added another dab of glue at the top of each carrot. I used some orange chalk paint and painted the carrots. I then used some of the greenery from this large carrot I had in my stash. I cut a small portion of it off and then glued it to the top of each of the carrots. I made a total of 3 carrots for this pot. I created the words for my sign in Design Space and used this little Dollar Tree chalkboard sign. And look at how stinking cute this little bunny butt pot turned out. To create the little bunny for my tiara tray, I used a Dollar Tree foam dice, 3 white balloons, and some burlap ribbon. I actually purchased the cut file for this project from Farmhouse. I cut the neck off of the balloons and stretched them over the dice. All I can say is be careful when you do this. I scared my poor Princess Crazy Paws. She was sitting next to me in her princess chair, and the dice slipped and flew in her direction. She stayed under my bed for about an hour. Next, I took the vinyl and applied it to the balloon. To make the ears, I used some burlap ribbon and cut it in the shape of bunny ears. For the pink part of the ears, I used a piece of pink paper and glued it to the burlap. You could use pink felt, I just didn't have any on hand. I had trouble getting the ears glued to the dice, so I used a small crafter stick, glued the ear to it, and then glued it to the back of the bunny head. As you can see, I had a floral crown to begin with. I just didn't like the crown, so I removed it with my fingernails and decided to make a spring hat for my bunny. I used more of the burlap ribbon I had used for the ears. I wrapped it around the bunny head and glued it. I pulled a leaf off of some flowers, folded it over, and glued it to the front of the burlap hat. I then used a pink flower from this ribbon and glued it on top of the leaf. And now I have the cutest tiara tray bunny face ever. Today, I'll be turning this Dollar General sign into a cute spring and Easter tiara tray sign. I used a pair of pliers and removed the metal piece from the front. I wanted to remove the paper from the picture so I could paint it. I used rubbing alcohol in a scraper and started removing the paper from the picture. It took some work, but I eventually got all the paper and glue residue off. And then used my hot air gun to dry it. I decided to paint the picture with brown acrylic paint first, and then I used white chalk paint. I'm running low on white chalk paint, so I poured some onto the picture and painted it. At first, I thought the sign was actually wood, but it was actually hard-pressed cardboard. So the alcohol made some of the edges of the picture swell up. I decided to use tumbling tower blocks to create a frame around the edge so it would cover up the swelling. I used this Americana wax to stain the blocks. I just love this wax. It's a light color and perfect for most of my projects. I then hot glued the blocks onto the picture. I created this cute cut file using Inkscape. I layered the different pieces onto the transfer paper and then applied it to the sign. I then applied gloss Mod Podge to the entire picture frame. And just look at how stinking cute this little tiara tray sign turned out. I got this little canvas and stand at Dollar General. I knew it would look amazing on a tiered tray. It was the perfect size. I liked the natural wood color of the stand, so all I had to do was paint the tiny canvas, and I used plaster chalk paint. It did take 2 coats to cover the image that was already on the canvas. While the canvas dried, I found this free cut file from Craft House. I sized the cut file to fit on the canvas and then cut it using my Cricut. Removed it from the transfer tape and applied it to the dried canvas. I added a small yellow buffalo check bow to the corner of the canvas. And it was that simple to create this adorable easel sign. Today I'm making this adorable fabric bunny using a buffalo print bandana I got for 99 cents from Hobby Lobby. I had this little bunny cutout that I used as a template. With a black Sharpie, I traced the bunny on the back of the fabric. I actually folded the bandana in half before tracing so I would have 2 bunnies cut just the same. After tracing it, I cut the bunny on the lines that I had traced. After I cut the bunny, I have 2 just the same size. I then put the bunnies together and used pins to hold them in place. And guys, I'm sorry, but for whatever reason, I didn't get the part where I was sewing the bunny with it turned inside out. So I will show you the stitch using this white felt and black string. I sewed the bunny from one foot all the way around to the other foot, leaving the space at the bottom open so I could apply the stuffing. I then started adding the stuffing and used a dowel to get the stuffing up into the ears. After I added the stuffing, I went back around the outside of the bunny to close up any holes. I wanted the bunny to look handmade and rustic. I continued stitching the entire bunny and closed the hole at the bottom. I decided the bunny needed some eyes. I found these 2 buttons in my stash and sewed them onto the bunny, trying to make sure they were as centered and even as possible. The last thing I did was add a little tail using a Dollar Tree white pom-pom and added a piece of twine around his neck. And look at him. He is so adorable and looks amazing on my spring tiered tray. I saw this adorable little basket at Goodwill the other day and knew it would look great on my tier tray. It was a little dirty, so I used a Dollar Tree kitchen sponge and cleaned it. I think all that it was old floral foam. I used white chalk paint and the dry brush method to give the basket more of a modern look. I wanted some eggs for the basket. I had these little glitter covered eggs in my stash, and they were the perfect size, but I didn't like the bright colors. So I mixed a tan craft paint and white chalk paint to paint them. I placed the eggs on skewers so I could paint them, and then placed them in a styrofoam block to let them dry. Once the eggs were dry, I took them off the skewers and put them in a box I always use for painting and drying. I used brown craft paint and a stencil brush to flick the paint onto the eggs, giving them a speckled look. This is messy and you will want to be careful when flicking the paint. I was afraid of getting paint all over the wall behind my work table, so I made sure I kept the brush pointed down. Now to decorate the little basket. I used some Dollar Tree Easter grass and placed it in the bottom of the basket. I cut the grass down so it would fit better. I placed the dried eggs in the basket and arranged them. I decided I wanted to add a cute little bow to the handle of the basket. And as y'all know, I am not good at bows. So for me, this was the hardest part of this project. After many attempts, I finally had the bow made and hot glued it to the top of the handle. And trust me, you don't want to see how long it took me to figure the bow out. And look at how cute the little basket turned out. Okay, so I just could not resist letting y'all watch me try to make this bow. I think y'all will get a good laugh out of it. As you can see, I tried doing it about 4 times before I finally got it. I picked up this little bucket on a recent trip to Goodwill. I thought it was cute and that it would make a cute little decor piece for this spring. And the best part was the price was $1.99. You can't beat that. I didn't like the eggs on the front and wanted to freshen up the bucket a little. I used some 220 sanding paper to remove as much of the eggs as I could. I was actually hoping it would remove all the paint. If it would have, I probably would have just left the bucket like it was without the eggs on them. Once I was finished sanding, I wiped the bucket down to remove all the sand dust before painting. The paint I used was Waverly Plaster. I painted the entire bucket, including the metal around the top and the bottom of the bucket. I also painted some of the inside of the bucket to just give it all a uniform look. I left the handle as is because I love the way it looked. After it dried, I used some sandpaper again to roughen it up a bit and remove as much paint as I could from the metal on the top and bottom. This is when I realized I should have left the metal alone and not painted it. Oh well, lesson learned. Once I finished sanding, I used another wet wipe to wipe down the bucket to remove all the sand dust. I found this cute cut file for free on Design Bundles. I did a little editing to the file in Design Space and cut it out on black matte vinyl. I applied the vinyl to transfer tape and then applied it to my bucket. I think this little bucket is perfect for spring and Easter. First, I used some of this Dollar Tree Easter basket grass and added it to the bucket to give something for my carrots to sit in. I used several carrots I got from a craft haul I got off Marketplace and a few carrots from Dollar Tree. I sporadically placed them in the bucket until I liked the way they looked. And I think the bucket of carrots turned out pretty cute. Please take a second to like this video and leave me a comment. This really helps my channel to grow so others just like yourself can find me. If you just found me, I hope you will join our little family by hitting the subscribe button. If you are already part of the family, thank you so much for your love and support. Y'all are the absolute best. Check out my new Amazon store for craft supply and farmhouse home decor recommendations. All the products I use from Amazon in my videos can be found there. Until next time, happy crafting!